Imagine you're driving down a road that you take every single day. You've got the radio on, you know exactly where you're going,
Hmm.
and suddenly you hit this massive roadblock. Construction. The road is just completely closed.
Oh, the absolute worst.
Right, it's the worst, but I mean, what do? Do you just park your car, turn off the engine, cross your arms, and, decide to live there
I
forever?
mean, you probably get pretty hungry if you did that. No, you look for a detour, obviously.
Exactly.
You might have to like take a side street you've never been down, or maybe ask a locals for directions, or just, trust your GPS to reroute you. The point is, you find some way around the obstacles so you can actually reach your destination.
And that scenario right there is, well, it's the perfect way to understand what happens when a student is trying to speak a foreign language. The destination is successful communication.
Right.
And the roadblock, that's, a word they suddenly forget or a grammar structure they just haven't learned yet. And that detour they end up taking, that is a communication strategy.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
So today on the deep dive, we are opening up your specific stack of notes, your study guides, and academic papers on Topic 40, Communication Strategies in Foreign Language Learning and Teaching.
It's a big one.
It really is. And we know you're listening right now because you are prepping for your major teaching exam. So our mission today is to just completely unpack this material for you. We're going to give you a structured, easy to memorize audio guide so you can absolutely nail this on test day.
Yeah, and it's actually a fascinating stack of sources, too, because it really highlights this massive shift in perspective in the whole field of language acquisition.
Oh, for sure, because the old way of thinking was pretty rigid, wasn't it?
Completely. I mean, looking through these pedagogical frameworks you have, the traditional view used to be almost entirely about perfect error-free sentences. Like the old grammar translation methods basically taught that if you didn't have the exact vocabulary word, well, the interaction was a failure.
You hit the roadblock and you park the car.
Exactly. You parked the car and gave up.
But flipping through your reading on modern acquisition theory, we now recognize that, well, real-world interaction is just messy. It's inherently unpredictable.
It's so messy. And successful communication isn't about grammatical perfection anymore. It's fundamentally about the ability to negotiate meaning.
Right, because when learners step outside your classroom, they are not going to have every linguistic resource they need. It's impossible.
Right, so communication strategies become their survival skills. It's what keeps the interaction alive when those resources inevitably run out.
Okay, so to understand the mechanics of those survival skills, your exam is going to require you to ground your answer in a solid theoretical framework. You can't just say they figure it out.
No, definitely not. When we talk about communication strategies academically, we're talking about specific conscious techniques or procedures that language users employ to solve immediate communication problems.
Problems like what, mostly?
Usually it's lexical gaps, like just forgetting a word or grammar uncertainty, or honestly just the sheer cognitive limits of processing a brand new language in real time.
Yeah, the brain just kind of overloads. And looking at your study guide, there are two major theoretical anchors you absolutely must memorize to get top marks here. The first one is Selinker. That's Selinker.
Yes, Selinker is crucial. Looking at his papers from the 1970s, he introduced this concept of interlanguage.
Okay, so if I'm understanding the reading correctly, Selinker is basically arguing that a second language learner isn't just speaking like a broken, corrupted version of the target language, right?
Right.
They've essentially invented a temporary hybrid language. Is that an accurate way to put it?
That is a highly accurate way to synthesize it, yeah.
Yeah.
He proposed that learners construct this unique, developing linguistic system of their own. It's an interlanguage.
The sort of middle ground.
Yeah, a structural bridge between their native tongue and the language they're trying to learn. And it has its own internal logic and rules, even if those rules don't quite match the target language yet. So in this framework, communication strategies are the vital cognitive mechanisms they use to cope when the demands placed on them suddenly exceed the current stage of that interlanguage.
So they're basically building the bridge while they're walking on it, and the strategies are the scaffolding keeping them from falling off.
That's a great metaphor for your exam, actually.
Awesome. Okay, so the second major anchor in your notes is the duo Canali and Swain, and they're attached to the concept of communicative competence.
Yes, and this was a huge paradigm shift in the early 80s. Before Canali and Swain, people largely just thought of language competence as knowing grammar and vocabulary, period.
Right.
But Canali and Swain proposed that true communicative competence has multiple equally important dimensions. You got grammatical competence, sociolinguistic competence, which is knowing what's socially appropriate in a given situation.
Discourse competence, right?
Yep, discourse competence. And crucially for this exam topic, strategic competence.
Okay, meaning the ability to use verbal and nonverbal means to fix breakdowns in the communication.
Exactly. And by adding that to the overall model, they essentially elevated communication strategies.
They stopped viewing them as just a panicked reaction.
Right. They classify them as an essential foundational dimension of overall communicative ability. They put it right on the exact same level as knowing your verb conjugations.
Yeah.
You literally cannot be fully competent in a language without strategic competence.
Okay, wait, let me push back on this for a second, just to play devil's advocate, because I can hear the skeptics, and I'm sure you'll have examiners who might want to see you defend this point.
Sure.
Isn't using a strategy just, I don't know, a polite way of covering up a deficiency or a mistake? Like, if I don't know the word, I'm just faking it till I make it. Isn't that a bug in the learning process?
I mean, it's a really common misconception, but no.
Yeah.
It is absolutely a feature, not a bug.
Really?
Yeah. What's fascinating when you dig into the cognitive psychology behind all this is that strategies actually reveal a learner's creativity and their cognitive flexibility.
Huh. How so?
Well, think about the mental gymnastics required. The learner realizes a gap exists. They scan their available limited vocabulary in milliseconds, and they actively manipulate the language they do have to build a bridge over the gap of the language they don't have.
Wow, yeah.
That takes a tremendously high level of cognitive processing. It's really impressive.
So it's active problem solving. It's not just passive failing.
Exactly. And to round out the theory section of your exam answer, your sources highlight 4 main features of these strategies that you need to just list out.
Okay, let's hear them.
First, they have a problem-solving nature. They don't just happen randomly. They're triggered exactly when an obstacle prevents direct meaning. Second, they have a compensatory function. They compensate for missing resources.
Okay, problem solving and compensatory.
Third, they have an interactional value. They aren't just isolated in the learner's head, They emerge in social exchanges to negotiate meaning with another human being. And fourth, they are dynamic and context dependent.
That context dependency makes total sense to me. Like, a learner is going to choose a different strategy depending on their proficiency level or how much time pressure they're under.
Or who they're talking to, yeah.
Right. If I'm talking to my teacher, I might try harder to find the exact right word. But if I'm, say, trying to buy a train ticket while the train is literally pulling out of the station, I'm just going to point at the ticket machine and grunt.
Which, honestly, is a highly effective context-dependent strategy in that exact moment.
Fair enough. So if we agree that these strategies are essential features of learning, how do we actually identify them out in the wild?
What do you mean?
Like, if I'm listening to a student, how do I know what kind of detour they're taking? Because this brings us to the key models and classifications section of your exam outline.
Ah, right. Well, the primary way your sources classify them, and this is the big divide you need to outline for your examiner, is avoidance strategies versus achievement strategies.
Avoidance and achievement.
Okay, well, avoidance sounds like a defense mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
I'm guessing this is when a learner encounters a difficulty and tries to reduce the cognitive load by simply avoiding the problematic language altogether.
That's the core of it, yeah. The working memory gets overloaded and the learner just opts out.
What does that look like?
They might abandon the message entirely mid-sentence, or they might suddenly change the topic, or they might just drastically oversimplify what they originally wanted to say so it fits into the very basic vocabulary they already possess.
Oh, like if I want to tell you a really complex story about my scuba diving trip to the coral reef, but I realize halfway through I don't know the words for coral reef or scuba gear or ocean current.
Right.
So I just shrug and say, I went to the beach, it was wet.
Exactly. Which, hey, technically prevents a communication breakdown in that specific moment. You didn't make a grammar mistake.
But I didn't really say what I wanted to say. No, you didn't. And pedagogically, it's a huge double-edged sword. Avoidance is a low-risk, low-reward cognitive choice. If a learner overuses avoidance strategies, it essentially halts their language development.
Because they're never stretching themselves.
Right, they never push the boundaries of their interlanguage, which can lead to fossilization, where their language skills just permanently plateau and stop improving.
Which means, as teachers, we obviously want to steer them toward the good stuff. The high-risk, high-reward detour. Achievement strategies.
Yes, achievement strategies involve actively attempting to convey meaning despite the linguistic limitations. You face the roadblock, and instead of turning around, You build the detour yourself.
That sounds like the pedagogical goldmine for language
It
teachers.
really is.
So let's deep dive into the specific achievement strategies you need to rapid fire list on your exam. Because looking through these classifications, the cognitive mechanisms behind some of these are just brilliant.
They are. Let's start with paraphrase and approximation. Approximation is basically using a word that's semantically close enough to the target word, even if it's not exactly right.
Right, so the brain is essentially searching its semantic network. And if it can't find the exact node for, let's say, mansion, it selects the closest available node, like big house.
Exactly. It gets the job done.
And then there's circumlocution, which is where you describe the physical traits or the function of the thing you don't know the word for.
Yes, describing around the word.
You know what these strategies remind me of? If you've ever played those party games like Taboo or Catchphrase,
Oh, yeah.
the whole premise of those games is forced circumlocution and approximation. You're holding a card that says refrigerator, but you aren't allowed to say cold or food or kitchen.
Right, so you're waving your hands around yelling, the big metal box where the milk lives.
Exactly.
And it's funny you mention that because when you play those games, you are artificially restricting your native vocabulary to deliberately exercise your strategic competence under pressure.
That's a great point.
And that's exactly what a language learner is doing in real-time conversation. Describing the function of an object actually requires a much higher cognitive load than just retrieving a memorized noun.
Yeah.
It forces the learner to manipulate syntax and descriptive adjectives on the fly.
Wow. Okay. What about word coinage? This one is really fascinating to me. This is when a learner makes up a brand new word based on the rules of the language they are learning.
Like saying airball for a balloon.
Right, or saying unsqueeze instead of relax.
Yes. And word coinage is a perfect example of why errors can actually be wonderful things in the classroom. When a student says unsqueeze, they are demonstrating a deep, albeit flawed, internalization of morphological rules.
They understand that the prefix un reverses an action.
Exactly. They don't know the word relax, but they know how to engineer a word that should technically mean the same thing based on the target language's logic. That is advanced interlanguage development right there.
I love that. Then there are a few more straightforward ones to round out your list. There's borrowing, which is just pulling a word from your native language, maybe giving it a funny foreign accent, and just hoping the other person understands.
We've all done that.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Then there's an appeal for assistance, which is a highly interactive strategy where the learner simply turns to their conversation partner or the teacher and just asks, how do you say?
Yeah, very common, very effective.
And finally, we can't forget nonverbal strategies. Mime, gesture, facial expressions.
Never underestimate the communicative power of a well-timed shrug or pointing at an object.
Seriously. Okay, so we have the theoretical framework and we have the diagnostic map of the strategies themselves. But an examiner isn't just testing your ability to memorize a taxonomy. We need to transition into the implications for teaching.
The practical side.
Right. Moving from the theory to the learner's brain. Why does knowing all of this actually matter for you as a future educator?
Well, if we trace what happens in the learner's brain, when a teacher actively encourages these achievement strategies, we see these amazing cascading benefits.
Like what?
When learners use a strategy like circumlocution, they stay active in the conversation. And because they remain active, they receive continuous linguistic input and feedback from their conversation partner.
Like the partner might say, oh, you mean the refrigerator?
Exactly. And that explicit feedback highlights the gap between what the learner originally wanted to say and what they actually said. In second language acquisition theory, this is known as noticing.
The learner's brain registers the gap.
Right. And noticing that gap is what ultimately drives the development of their interlanguage. It's the primary mechanism that pushes their proficiency forward. I guarantee they won't forget the word refrigerator after that because they had to actively struggle to negotiate the meaning of it.
That makes total sense.
There's also a massive psychological benefit here that your sources heavily emphasize. I mean, think about the sheer anxiety of speaking a foreign language.
Oh, it's terrifying. You're constantly afraid of looking foolish or incompetent.
Exactly. But when you explicitly teach a student that they don't need the perfect word to successfully communicate, that they actually have this entire toolkit of valid, academically recognized detours to get around the roadblock, it severely reduces their affective filter. Their anxiety plummets.
It builds incredible learner autonomy. They start to realize they can survive outside the classroom without the teacher whispering the vocabulary words in their ear.
It shifts their whole self-perception from, I am failing to speak perfectly, to, I am successfully solving a communication problem.
I love that shift. But let's ground this in the messy reality of the classroom, though. Because if you're prepping to be a secondary education teacher, you know that adolescents can be incredibly self-conscious.
Oh, for sure.
Like a 15-year-old is hyper-aware of how they look and sound to their peers. So how does teaching these potentially silly-looking communication strategies specifically apply to secondary education? Does waving your arms to describe a refrigerator actually work with a room full of self-conscious teenagers?
It actually works brilliantly with adolescents. Perhaps even better than with young children, believe it or not.
Wait, really? Why?
Because teenagers have something younger children don't fully possess yet. High-level metacognitive ability.
Ah.
They have the cognitive maturity to reflect on their own thinking processes. A 7-year-old might naturally use a gesture without thinking about it, but an adolescent can step outside themselves, analyze the interaction, and understand exactly why a specific detour worked.
Meaning they can say, wow, me making hand gestures looked a bit silly, but the shopkeeper understood exactly what I needed.
Precisely. Because they have that metacognitive awareness, you don't just have to hope they implicitly acquire these skills, you can be completely explicit about it.
Just tell them straight up.
Yes. Explicit instruction and modeling by the teacher are key here. You show them that native speakers use these detours all the time. Now, having said that, you shouldn't teach strategies as isolated, decontextualized drills. Handing out a circumlocution worksheet on a Wednesday is useless.
Because there's no actual communication breakdown happening on a worksheet. It's just a fill in the blank.
Right. They must be taught in meaningful, interactive contexts where communicative pressure naturally occurs. And then you guide the teenagers to reflect. You ask them, what did you do when you didn't know the word? Oh, you described its shape. Look how successful that was. You kept the conversation alive.
Okay, let's bring this home with the classroom application section. Because this is the practical finish to a strong exam answer. You need to show the examiner exactly what this looks like on a Tuesday morning in your classroom. If worksheets don't work, what activities actually foster strategic competence?
You need to design tasks that create a deliberate information gap. Information gap exercises are a classic pedagogical tool because student A has information that student B needs to complete a task.
They literally have to communicate to finish the assignment.
Right. The roadblock is built directly into the design of the activity, forcing them to negotiate meaning.
You can also use role plays and simulations, but you have to add a twist, right? Like put them in a scenario where they are trying to return a broken item at a store, but explicitly tell them they aren't allowed to use the words receipt or broken.
Yes, force the detour.
Yeah.
Problem-solving tasks and debates are also excellent for this. When students have to justify an opinion on a complex topic, it almost always stretches their available vocabulary to its absolute limits.
It naturally forces them to rely on paraphrase and approximation just to get their point across.
Exactly.
And looking at your notes, storytelling or picture descriptions are heavily recommended too, like giving a student a bizarre abstract picture and asking them to describe it to a partner who has to draw it sight unseen.
That perfectly triggers circumlocution and appeals for assistance.
Oh, and for extra points on the exam, be sure to mention digital tools, collaborative online tasks, video interactions, or even asynchronous forums. They simulate modern, authentic communication where meaning has to be negotiated constantly through both tech and media.
Good tip. Now let's talk about the hardest part for a teacher and a crucial component of your exam answer: assessment. Assessing strategic competence is incredibly complex.
Well, yeah, because it's not binary. Like we talked about at the very beginning, it's not a spelling test where the word is either right or wrong.
Right.
Okay, but let me push back here again as someone playing devil's advocate. As a teacher with 30 loud teenagers in a room, how realistic is it to grade something as invisible as strategic competence? Doesn't that feel incredibly subjective compared to just grading a multiple-choice grammar test?
It is more subjective, absolutely. And it requires a fundamental shift in how you observe your students. Strategic behavior is embedded in performance. It is not an isolated skill you can just check off a list.
So what do you do?
If your curriculum claims to assess communicative competence, you simply cannot just grade for grammatical accuracy anymore. If a student makes 3 glaring grammar mistakes but successfully navigates a complete communication breakdown using circumlocution and an appeal for assistance, they have demonstrated high strategic competence.
Okay, but how do you actually put a grade in the gradebook for that without going crazy?
Teachers must actively observe how learners negotiate meaning in real time. You need to recommend using observation scales and analytical rubrics on your exam.
Ah, rubrics. Got it.
Yeah, instead of just having columns for vocabulary and grammar, these rubrics should specifically have criteria for maintenance of interaction, adaptation to context, and ability to overcome breakdowns. You're assessing their fluency of thought, not just their accuracy of syntax.
Let me summarize this for you because I think this is the perfect mindset to take into your exam. As a teacher, you are not just grading the perfect sentence, you are actively rewarding the save.
Oh, I love that phrasing.
When a student's vocabulary fails, and the conversation is nosediving toward an awkward silence, and they pull out a brilliant paraphrase or a gesture to rescue it, you have to give positive feedback for that rescue. You are grading their resilience.
Rewarding the save. That captures the essence of communicative language teaching perfectly. It tells the student that their effort to connect is vastly more valuable than their ability to be flawless.
All right, let's pull all of this together for your outro. When you get to the conclusion paragraph of your exam essay, you need a strong, definitive thesis that recaps everything we've synthesized from these sources today.
Your core thesis should be this: communication strategies are not a secondary performance aspect, nor are they merely a polite crutch for poor vocabulary.
Right.
Grounded in the theories of Slinker and Canale and Swain, they are essential foundational cognitive tools that build communicative competence. Pedagogically, they foster learner autonomy, drive interlanguage development through noticing, and severely reduce anxiety.
And regarding application.
Furthermore, to be effective, they cannot be taught via isolated drills. They must be integrated into meaningful, gap-based classroom activities where students are given the space to negotiate meaning authentically.
Nail that paragraph and you've got topic 40 in the bag. You understand the theory, the classifications, the cognitive mechanics, and the classroom applications. But before we sign off, we want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you get back to your flashcards.
Yeah, we've been talking entirely about foreign language learning today, analyzing how students cope with limited vocabulary. But if strategic competence is really just about compensating for linguistic limits to successfully negotiate meaning,
How much of our everyday native language communication is actually just us using successful achievement strategies that we simply stopped noticing? Think about it.
that's true.
How many times today have you forgotten a word in your own native language because you were tired and you just talked around it? How many times have you used a hand gesture because you couldn't find the right adjective to describe a feeling?
Or coined a weird new word that your friends just understood through context.
Exactly. The detours aren't just for language learners. We are all navigating roadblocks all the time, building bridges just to understand each other. Enjoy the detour and good luck on your exam.